I found a hidden camera in my apartment. The police said it had been there longer than I had. I discovered the camera because I dropped a coin under my bed. That's the only reason. If I hadn't been looking for that coin, I probably would have kept sleeping in that apartment for months, maybe years. And whoever was watching me would have kept watching. This happened 2 years ago, when I was 26. I had just moved to a new city for work and rented a small apartment on the 4th floor of an older building. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but the neighborhood seemed safe. The building was quiet, and the landlord appeared normal. His name was Daniel. He was probably in his late 40s, always neatly dressed, always polite. During the viewing, he told me the previous tenant had moved overseas unexpectedly. The apartment still had some furniture, a bed, a wardrobe, a small dining table and a television mounted on the wall. Daniel said I could use everything. At the time, I thought I had gotten lucky. For the first few weeks, nothing strange happened. Then I started noticing little things. The first was the bathroom door. I always left it slightly open because the bathroom had poor ventilation. But sometimes, when I came home from work, it would be completely closed. I assumed the air pressure from the hallway had moved it. Then objects began appearing in places where I didn't remember leaving them. My coffee mug would be on the right side of the sink instead of the left. A kitchen chair would be pulled out slightly. My phone charger would be unplugged from the wall. Nothing was ever stolen. That somehow made it easier to ignore. I blamed myself. I was working long hours, sleeping badly and drinking too much coffee. I thought I was becoming forgetful. But there was one thing I couldn't explain. The smell. Every few days, I would come home and smell cigarette smoke in the bedroom. Smoking wasn't allowed in the building, and I didn't smoke. I asked the neighbors if the smell could be coming through the ventilation, but the woman next door said nobody on our floor smoked. I messaged Daniel. He replied almost immediately. Old buildings hold smells, probably from the previous tenant. That answer bothered me. The apartment had been professionally cleaned before I moved in, and the smell wasn't old or stale. It smelled fresh, like someone had just finished smoking. I considered changing the locks, but the front door had an electronic lock with a code. Daniel had given me my own code and told me the previous tenant's code had been deleted. I asked if he still had an emergency code. He said the property manager did, but it was only used for fires or water leaks. A week later, I woke up at around 3 in the morning because I thought someone had whispered my name. I sat up and listened. The apartment was silent. Then I heard a soft click from the hallway. It sounded like the front door locking. I got out of bed and checked every room. Nobody was there. The windows were closed. The front door was locked. I even opened the wardrobe and looked underneath the bed. Nothing. The next morning, I installed a cheap motion detection camera in the living room. I placed it on a bookshelf facing the front door. For 5 nights, it recorded nothing unusual. On the 6th night, the camera went offline at 2:13 a.m. There was no power outage. My internet router stayed connected, and all my other devices worked normally. The camera came back online at 2:41. The recording ended with the empty living room. The next clip started 28 minutes later. The living room still looked empty, but one of the cushions on the sofa had moved. I watched the videos over and over. I couldn't prove anything. I contacted the camera company. They told me the device had been manually turned off. That was when I decided to move. I didn't tell Daniel why. I just said I had found an apartment closer to work and would leave at the end of the month. He seemed disappointed, but he didn't argue. A few days later, I was sitting on my bed, counting coins for the laundromat. One slipped out of my hand and rolled underneath the bed. I turned on my phone's flashlight and reached for it. The coin had rolled all the way to the wall. When I lowered my head, I noticed a small black spot underneath the bedside table. At first, I thought it was a screw. Then the spot reflected my flashlight. I pulled the table away from the wall. There was a tiny circular lens hidden inside the electrical outlet. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. I stared at it for almost a minute, trying to convince myself that it was some kind of sensor. Then I took a photo and searched online. It was a camera. A miniature camera had been installed behind the plastic outlet cover, aimed directly at the bed. I didn't touch it. I grabbed my keys, left the apartment and called the police from the street. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. They searched the bedroom and removed the outlet cover. Behind it was a small camera, connected to a wire running inside the wall. One of the officers asked me if I had installed any security equipment. I said no. They searched the rest of the apartment. They found another camera inside the smoke detector in the living room. A third one was hidden in the bathroom ventilation grill. That camera was aimed directly at the shower. I felt physically sick. The police told me to stay somewhere else that night. I packed a bag while they photographed everything. Daniel arrived about an hour later. He looked genuinely shocked. He kept saying he had no idea how the cameras got there. He blamed the previous tenant. He said maybe she had installed them for security. One officer asked why a tenant would install a hidden camera facing her own shower. Daniel stopped talking. The police took him to the station for questioning. I stayed with a co-worker for the next several days. At first, I believed the cameras belonged to Daniel. It seemed obvious. But the truth was more complicated. The wiring inside the walls was old. An investigator later told me the cameras had probably been installed at least 4 or 5 years earlier, long before Daniel purchased the apartment. The camera in the bedroom wasn't connected to the internet. The cable led into the wall, down through a maintenance shaft and into a locked storage room in the basement. The police opened the room. Inside, they found an old computer, recording equipment, dozens of external hard drives and a chair facing several monitors. The storage room did not belong to Daniel, according to the building records. It was considered a shared maintenance area, but only 2 people officially had keys: the building manager and a repairman who had worked there for over a decade. The building manager was an elderly man named Arthur. I had seen him many times. He collected packages, replaced light bulbs, and helped tenants when they locked themselves out. He always smiled at me. He lived on the first floor with his wife. When police searched his apartment, they found one of the missing hard drives under his bed. Arthur was arrested. Daniel was released. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The police contacted me 3 weeks later and asked me to come to the station. They had reviewed some of the footage. There were recordings from at least 6 apartments in the building. Some videos were more than 8 years old. Arthur had apparently been using his access to empty apartments to install cameras. Before new tenants moved in, he didn't watch everyone all the time. He selected certain tenants, usually people who lived alone. The officer told me they had footage of me going back to my first night in the apartment. But there was something else. Several recordings showed a person entering my apartment while I was at work. The person wore a dark hood and kept their face covered. At first, police assumed it was Arthur, but the body shape didn't match. Arthur was short and overweight. The person in the videos was tall and thin. They never stole anything. They walked through my apartment slowly, touching objects, opening drawers and sitting on my bed. In one video, the person stood beside the bed for nearly 20 minutes, just standing there. The police believed this was the person who smoked inside my bedroom. They also believed this person had disconnected my living room camera on the night it went offline. I asked how they had entered. The officer said they had used the emergency access code, the same code Daniel claimed only the property manager knew. The police questioned Daniel again. He admitted that the code had been shared with several maintenance workers over the years. Nobody had ever changed it because residents had individual codes, and management assumed the emergency code was safe. The repairman was investigated, but his height didn't match the person in the recordings. He also had proof that he was out of town during at least 2 of the entries. Police never identified the person. I moved out immediately. I replaced almost everything I owned from that apartment, including the bed, my clothes, and even my phone. I knew it wasn't rational, but I felt like every object had been contaminated by the fact that someone had touched it. While I was gone, Arthur eventually pleaded guilty to multiple charges. The unidentified person was never caught. For a long time, I tried not to think about it. Then, 6 months after I moved, I received an envelope at my new address. There was no return address. Inside was a single printed photograph. It showed me asleep in my old bedroom. The angle was not from any of the hidden cameras the police had discovered. This photo had been taken from beside the bed. Someone had been standing less than a foot away from me. On the back, there were 5 handwritten words. "You looked directly at me." I gave the photograph to the police. They reopened the investigation, but nothing came from it. I moved again. I didn't tell anyone my new address except my parents and my employer. I stopped posting photographs online. I covered the cameras on my devices. I checked every smoke detector, outlet and ventilation grill in my new apartment. For almost a year, nothing happened. Then last month, I woke up at 3:07 in the morning. My bedroom door was open. I always close it before I sleep. There was a faint smell of cigarette smoke in the hallway, and on the floor beside my bed was a coin. The same kind I had dropped under the bed 2 years earlier. I haven't slept in that apartment since. The police say there's no evidence anyone entered. But they're wrong. Because yesterday, I received another envelope. This one contained no photograph. Only a small piece of paper with a sentence written in the same handwriting. "You never looked under the new bed.